for you, what's the first big historical event that you actually remember happening in your lifetime?
It was probably the Challenger explosion in 1986.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that was the first one that I remember.
What do you remember of that day?
So I remember getting home from school, and my parents were watching the television, and by that time the explosion had already happened, and they were just watching the replays of it, and the commentary from the news people and everything like that. And of course, that was the mission that had Krista McCullough on it. The teacher who was going up in space.
Yes.
So that was a really big deal. So it was a really highly publicized launch. And it really kind of, anything like that would be a tragedy. But that kind of, I guess, amplified it a little bit. So yeah, I remember just kind of sitting down with them and, them explaining to me, what happened and everything like that. A lot of people, who are around my age, will comment that they remember seeing it live. But I think a lot of them, I'm not saying people didn't see it live at school, but probably a lot of it is what they actually remember is catching it on the evening news or the replays in the afternoon. So that's probably the first big thing that I remember.
That's I think someone else had brought that up. Was it Dave?
It might have been Dave. But it's funny you say that, JD, because I did see it live in school.
Okay.
Remember, I went to school in Cheyenne, Wyoming, grade school. And they had brought us all into like the hallway to watch it on one of those rolling cart TVs.
Yeah.
And because the teacher was going up, right? So it was a big deal. There had been so much coverage beforehand, right? Because it was a big contest, I remember, to be picked to be the teacher to go into space. And we were watching it. So this is what I remember about it. We were watching it, and then that happened, and then they just turned it off and told us to go back to class. Like they didn't know what to do. And I just remember being, okay. Like I didn't think of it as a big deal until I got home. Right? I thought we just watched it, and I didn't quite understand what happened there, but they just turned it off, and I thought, okay, maybe that's when they left the atmosphere. Like, you don't know, you're a kid, right? Maybe that's what it looks like when they leave the atmosphere, so no one's saying, oh my gosh, it's crashing. Like, they're just like, and they just turned it off, go back to class. And so I remember seeing it, but not remembering in that moment being scared or anything, like going back to class. And it was later on when we got home that everyone was upset. And like you said, that's one of the earliest continual footage. They didn't really used to do that on the news, play something over and over and over. And that was one of the first things that they did was that shuttle disaster.
Was CNN a thing by that time? I can't remember.
Maybe it was new. Because I remember when Cable News Network came and people were like, no one's going to watch the news for 24 hours. Like, who wants to watch a channel of the news?
Oh, goodness
like,
gracious.
people just want to see it once or twice a day, and that's it. And no one thought it was going to make it. Right?
Yeah, little did they know that it was going to explode and lead to the downfall of our civilization.
I know, exactly. Exactly. Now I just want to turn it off.
There's other people that feel that way. Are like, oh, I can't handle the news today. I'm not doing the news.
Oh, we've taken some media breaks in this house because it's like I can't handle it anymore.
Yeah. So I definitely remember that during the Gulf War, but I can't remember if that was around during the Challenger explosion or not.
I think that's when CNN kind of really established itself, right? As being that reliable at the time, and any news work. I'll say any. I won't lean one way or the other on the podcast.
You're absolutely right.
we'll try to steer away from that on the podcast while I'm drinking.
So this says CNN started June 1st, 1980. So they would have been around.
So they would have. So they would have been around. They would have been around. But one of the things I find, JD, that's interesting about the first event that we remember in our youth, is it tends to and kind of chime in and see if if there's anything that kind of led to further interest after the fact. But it tends to kind of like be, one, a shock, right? It's typically pretty shocking, and two, it kind of lifts the curtain, and you're just like, oh my gosh, there's a larger world out there. Have you ever kind of like, I mean, you being in education, have you ever kind of talked to your students about something like that? Like, hey, what do you guys remember of large historical event or anything?
Yeah, are you asking like what my students, what large historical event they've witnessed, or them asking me?
I'd say for you, right? I mean, because again, for me, that was kind of a two-part question that I wasn't intending to ask that way.
Okay.
But I mean, do you feel like at that time you remember that all of a sudden your kind of mindset shifted after that? You're like, okay, I know that there's a bigger world out there, and something's more real now than it was before.
Okay. Yeah. So there have been a couple of those moments. I can also remember whenever the Berlin Wall fell.
Okay.
So that was one. Again, I was fairly young whenever that happened, but old enough to where I could kind of understand this is something big. So we're watching.
What do you remember of the Berlin Wall? Is it like just watching on TV? Is it like, did you watch the Hoff up there dancing on the wall? Or
yeah. So I remember watching the news footage and people taking hammers to the wall and sledgehammers, and watching David Hasselhoff get up there and sing with his his jacket, and for me that was cool, because I was like, dude, that's Knight Rider.
I remember Knight Rider. Yeah, absolutely.
I was like, where's Kit?
Kit's on the west side.
So I had no clue what was going on there. I had no idea what the Berlin Wall was, why it was there, or anything like that. So that was one that kind of opened up the world a little bit to me. Sure. As far as, and this is so stinking weird to me, as far as like my students, what they ask me about is 9/11. They want to know,
interesting.
Hey, what are your memories of 9/11? Where were you at? What was going on? Because this crop of kids that we have now weren't even alive whenever that happened.
Gosh,
amazing.
I haven't, like you just saying that is like, that's literally hitting me right now, that there's kids that are later on in high school or graduating high school that weren't even alive then. I was in college still.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So was I. So and really whenever that first hit me, I didn't even think about it. But every year on September 11th, being in a history class and everything, obviously you take time and talk about it and everything like that. And high school kids are going to be high school kids, and some of them would kind of moan about it and say, "Man, we talk about this every year." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, this was a huge deal." I was like, "Don't you remember?" And they were like,
"Yeah."
Oh my gosh.
And they're like, "We weren't even born yet." And I was like, "Holy smokes!" Because it's so, for us.
Yes.
Yeah. That feels like yesterday. So, but it would be like, somebody saying to me, do you not remember the fall of Saigon? How could you not?
Exactly.
I wasn't born yet.
Yeah, sure.
So anyway, but there's a lot of curiosity that the students will have, about that and everything. And Yeah, then I get to feel like an old man, telling stories about what I remember from these historical events. Oh my gosh,
I haven't had that yet. I mean, we've got 3 kids, right? Like even our oldest isn't quite old enough to be to just either care enough or have those questions or anything like that. But I'm sure the day will come when he's old enough to be like, "Hey, Mom, hey, Dad, like, what do you remember of 9/11?" And
yeah.
And that's a tough one, right? I was at a military academy, right, not far from the Pentagon, and like I had friends who had parents that were in the Pentagon. The one guy I knew, his dad was okay, and Jen got winged.
I got winged 3 days after 9/11.
3 days after 9/11, her orders changed. She was supposed to go to Japan. Instead, she went to San Diego and then deployed. Like, so for us, it affected us. I mean, there was faculty that were reservists at the Naval Academy. They got recalled and sent on deployment, right? Because all of a sudden there was the surge, right? They're sending all these troops overseas. So for both of us,
it changed everything.
I mean, her life course changed. Like I knew people that got deployed because of it. You know,
it was so interesting. I tell people because we don't think about it now, but I joined the military before 9/11 when it really was like, oh, the military, okay, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the Cold War was kind of winding down a little. So people were like, well, you must.
Mid to late 90s.
Yeah, like it was always like, you must come from a poor family. And I'm like, well, yeah, and I need the military to go to college. So yeah, that's true. But my dream was always to be a pilot. After 9/11, nobody questioned why I was in the military. Yeah. It was amazing. It was just the 180 that people did. It really surprised me, and I was very proud to see how the nation came together.
I had a buddy who was working in a restaurant, and he was trying to figure out what to do with his life and everything. And his boss, who ended up later becoming a coworker of mine, told him, he said, "Hey, you ought to maybe think about going into the military. They'll fund your college and everything like that." And he was like, "Oh man, I don't know. What if there's a war?" And he's like, "Listen, there's zero chance that this country's like those days are over." And he graduated boot camp on September 12th.
Oh my God!
Holy cow!
Yep, the day after September 11th. And he said
that's
the
wild.
day before. So they were sitting there watching that stuff on TV, and the guys were like, "Boys, things are going to be a little bit different for you than the ones who graduated before you."
How interesting.
Yeah. That's how we all felt, because you when you join the military that could happen.
Yep.
But at that time, it was never really a would happen kind of thing.
Yeah.
And after that, it was like, wow, okay.
Well, and there was just so much more that changed with 9/11 because it wasn't a nation state. It wasn't a country.
It's a different type of
It was
war.
a different kind of thing that caused a conflict, right?
Yeah.
And without diving too deep down the military hole, which Jen and I could very easily do. And JD, I'm sure you could too, because you cover a lot of that.
I love the stuff you cover, JD.
The World War II stuff, the Civil War, and all the good history stuff you cover. But shifting away from that, one of the other things that I find really interesting is kind of some local history. And so the third question I'm going to ask you, JD, is what's kind of something that's a bit of regional history that everybody in your area had either knew? So what's a bit of regional history that you think might fall into that category?
Like I said, I grew up in Missouri.